Hello everyone, welcome to Social Research Methods. My name is Dr. Natasha Push. I am an assistant professor in the School of Sociology, Anthropology, and Social Work, and I am going to be your professor this semester. So we are going to get started on chapter 1 of your textbook, Human Inquiry and Science. So the first thing we're going to talk about is sort of what social research is and sort of how we know what we know. So we can, have our opinions and our experiences from a lot of different areas, such as personal experiences or observing something, agreement reality, example, touching a hot stove. This means that, you don't necessarily have to touch a stove every time to know that it's going to be hot. You can sort of agree with the statement that a stove that is on is going to be hot. You don't have to touch it every time to, make sure that it's always going to be hot. So assertions that we make must be both logical and empirical. Logical meaning, does it make sense? So it doesn't make sense to expect that, when you turn your stove on, that it's going to be cold sometimes and hot sometimes. A stove that is on is always going to be hot, obviously, unless it's broken. And empirical means that it must not contradict actual observations. So this is known as epistemology, or the science of knowing. So again, we don't necessarily have to experience everything for ourselves without, accepting it as true. And then the methodology means the science of finding out. So we're going to talk about this a lot during the semester, and of course throughout the semester when you're working on your research projects. Okay, so next we're going to talk a little bit about ordinary human inquiry, or the recognition that the future is caused in part by the present. So, to predict your future exam score, well, it's going to depend on how much you're going to be studying in the present. You can't, predict that you're going to get 100% and not study. Trust me, it does not work that way. So we have to study in the present in order to, predict the score that we're going to get later on. The cause and effect patterns are probabilistic in nature, meaning that they don't always happen the way they should be. They usually do most of the time, but again, this is social research, and we're unable to fully predict things every single time from happening. You don't have to be able to understand something in order to predict it. For example, let's look at the weather here in West Texas. You can tell when a storm is coming, right? You can, there's a different feeling outside. You probably see clouds. Maybe it gets a little windy. You don't have to understand exactly, atmospheric science and how everything works. But you can, predict a storm coming pretty well without fully understanding something. Okay, so one way that we know things is through tradition. So information that is passed down through generations. So this is beneficial in some ways. For example, we don't have to start from scratch. So for example, if we wanted to, let's again talk about atmospheric science. If we want to learn about the weather, we don't have to start from the very beginning and do our own experiments to, understand the weather. We can use what other people have found out and build upon that. So we don't necessarily have to start from scratch. We can build on previous generations of knowledge. We also call this standing on the shoulders of giants. There is a detriment to this, though. It's not always correct. So sometimes, things are passed down through tradition, and it's just, not correct. We have better ways of figuring things out now. We have better science now, and things that are passed down through generations doesn't always make them so. Okay, so another way that we find out is through authority, or who is telling us this information. So again, a person's status determines if others will accept the information. So generally, we're probably, if we're, again, looking at the weather, we're probably going to trust the opinions of a weatherman or someone, that has an advanced degree in atmospheric sciences rather than some, random person that you're meeting that's just sort of talking out of their ass. The same thing goes for, a lot of different topics. it really depends on who is giving you this information. That's going to matter whether you're going to accept it as reality or not. So credentials matter, and even experts, but even experts do make mistakes. So this is a little example that I saw it was like Office Depot. So it was Shaq, famous basketball player selling printers. And I thought about it. I'm like, why would we, accept Shaq's opinion on printer ink? If Shaq was going to sell me basketball shoes, I would say that he's probably a better authority to sell basketball equipment than he is to sell, printer ink. Maybe he knows a lot about printer ink. I don't know. But it just seemed sort of a weird spokesperson to have for printer ink, because I feel that Shaq doesn't have a lot of authority to be talking about printer ink when maybe he should be talking about basketball equipment. Okay, and of course, people make errors. So we call this errors in human inquiry. So one thing that happens is that humans make inaccurate observations. So, for example, if I asked you what you had for dinner exactly 1 month ago, you probably won't remember. You could probably make a pretty good guess because, there's probably a few meals that you have quite often, but this would be an inaccurate observation because, you're really just guessing about this. Eyewitness identification, there's a big problem with this. I'm a criminologist, and for a long time we were basing eyewitness identification. We were giving it a lot of weight, and now we know that people make inaccurate observations all the time, and we can't really send somebody to prison for a crime simply based off eyewitness identification. So how do we safeguard against this? Maybe measurement devices. Again, not putting so much weight on humans because, we make errors all the time. Okay, another error in human inquiry is overgeneralizations. This is making the incorrect assumption that a few similar events are part of a larger pattern, so overgeneralizing. So I'm going to use an example here of my dogs. All 3 of them absolutely love broccoli. It's like their favorite food. So if I say that all dogs prefer broccoli over steak, I'm probably making an overgeneralization because a lot of dogs really don't like broccoli, and most of them probably do prefer steak. So one way of guarding against this is to have large and representative samples that are a safeguard against overgeneralizations. Another error in human inquiry is selective observations. So these are only paying attention to cases that fit the pattern. So this is avoid looking for deviant cases. So one thing that there's a lot of selected observations about right now is vaccine reactions. So we know that vaccines are generally safe, but there are people that have adverse reactions to this. These anti-vaxxers are really, making selective observations saying that, look, if you have a vaccine, you're going to get one of these, adverse reactions to it, when really most people are completely fine, and they're specifically looking for those cases to fit their narrative. So another error in human inquiry is illogical reasoning, or the exception that proves the rule. So a good example of this is the gambler's fallacy. So this tends to be thinking that there's a pattern of observations, and if something, has the same pattern a few times in a row, then there's bound to be, a difference there. For example, if the roulette ball falls on black 3 times, you might be thinking, well, it's bound to fall on red next time, so I'm going to bet on red. When really there is no bearing on what was rolled previously. So there's the same, amount of probability that it's going to land on black rather than red. So things that have happened in the past sometimes have no bearing on the future, gambling being one of them. So if you think, okay, I'm bound for a big payout, I lost at the casino the past 3 times in a row, does not mean that you're going to win this time, so save your money. There's just as much of a chance that you're going to lose again. Okay, so now we're going to look at a few of the different views of reality. So the pre-modern view, this is basically things are just as they seem. the modern view, which acknowledges human subjectivity, and the postmodern view that says there really is no objective reality. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the foundations of social science. Again, social science being science that is done with humans. So there's sort of three main things that we're going to be thinking about here. These are all three are going to be very, very important for your final project that you're going to do. So, pay attention to this. First being the theory or why things happen. Second being data collection. And then third being your data analysis, where you look at the data you collected and see whether or not it fits your theory. Okay, so theory is not a philosophy or belief. It has to do with what is, not what should be. So science cannot settle debates on value. We can't ask which is better, a STEM degree or a social science degree, again, because we can't determine a value on this. But what we can do is maybe do an investigation into whether your earning power will be more with a STEM degree or more with a social science degree. So a theory, a systematic explanation for the observations that relate to a particular aspect of life. So why are things, what they are? Again, there's so many different theories out there. I'm a criminologist, so I focus mostly on criminal theory, or why people commit crimes, why, certain places have higher crime rates than others. But there's lots and lots and lots of different theories that you might apply depending on the topic for your research project. Okay, so in social research, we look at social regularities, so probabilistic patterns. We're looking at patterns of behavior rather than outliers. So for example, most serial killers are men, but there's several exceptions to the rule. A very, very small percentage of serial killers are female. This is Eileen Wuornos. She killed, I think, 7 or 9 men. This is an exception to the rule. It's pretty rare. It happens. The important thing to remember about social science is that we're looking at people and we can never perfectly predict human behavior. So it's not like physics where, you drop a ball and every single time it's going to, go towards the ground. There's not going to be any time that it flies up into the sky, I guess, unless there's a ton of wind or something. But social research is different in that we can never perfectly predict human behavior. So here we're looking at patterns of the most probabilistic outcomes. We also look at aggregates and not individuals. While there are, some forms of social science research that you can do that really dives really deeply into a particular person or particular event, mostly we're looking at aggregates or groups. So the collective actions and situations of many individuals. So the focus of social science is to explain why aggregated patterns of behavior are regular, even when individuals change over time. So here we have an example of birth rate. Another example would be, maybe the age-crime relationship, meaning that over the years, there's kind of always been a similar age of people that are more likely to be involved in crime. And even though these people are changing all the time, and we have new cohorts coming into sort of the highest crime age, which is late adolescence, early adulthood, this pattern doesn't really change over time. So again, we're looking at aggregates and not individuals. Okay, so one thing that is very important in this class, and you really want to start thinking about now, is qualitative versus quantitative data. So you are going to be collecting one of these two types of data. Qualitative data is non-numerical data, so things like interviews, observations, case studies, while quantitative data is numerical data. So we're collecting numbers, statistics, and doing a little bit of math. So we have two statements here. The first is Bob is intelligent, which is more of a qualitative statement, being we're not directly measuring his intelligence, but maybe somebody did an interview with Bob and said, yeah, he's a pretty intelligent guy. However, if we would say Bob has an IQ of 130, this would be more of a quantitative statement. So here we are taking an exact measurement of a variable and applying it to Bob. So we're measuring Bob's IQ and coming out with, a number with 130. So again, start thinking about what you would rather do for your project, whether you want to do maybe interviews and observations, or whether you want to take an existing data set and do a couple of very simple and easy statistical analyses. So mixed methods research is very popular in social sciences as well, and it combines both qualitative and quantitative data. And we're going to go very, very in-depth into both these types of data in later chapters. Okay, another thing that is very important are concepts and variables. So variables is something that we use in our quantitative research, and it is a measurement, which is a logical grouping of attributes. So some of the very common variables that we might use in social research are age, gender, race, crime rates, depression, anything that can be measured with a logical grouping of attributes. And an attribute is a characteristic or quality that describes an object. So for example, maybe if we're looking at gender, well then the attributes are going to be female and male. We're looking at occupation, maybe a lawyer, a doctor, a plumber, etc. Just something to keep in mind because we're going to go in depth into this in a following chapter. Okay, so what we're looking at in our quantitative social science research is a relationship between two variables. So basically, is there a relationship there? So first, we're going to look at education and prejudice. And these are our two variables, education and whether or not somebody is considered prejudiced. And we're going to look to see if there's a relationship. So here in the first, sort of the top little graph picture thing there, we can see that there does seem to be a relationship in being uneducated and being more prejudiced, whereas at the bottom, there doesn't seem to be a relationship there. So you're just as likely to be prejudiced whether you're educated or uneducated. So probably one of the most important things to take out of this chapter is independent and dependent variables. Very, very important. There are going to be multiple questions on the exams. There's going to be a question if you do a quantitative project on what your independent and dependent variable are. And I will tell you, it takes a little bit to get it. I didn't, I couldn't identify independent and dependent variables until I was in grad school. So don't feel bad if you don't get it right away, because it's something that's difficult to grasp. But when you do grasp it, then it's very, very easy to identify the independent and dependent variables. So in a causal relationship, the independent variable precedes the dependent variable. So we would say that this would be the cause. So our dependent variable is the variable that depends on the independent variable. Again, it's kind of hard to grasp, but as you practice more and more, you will be able to get it. So independent variable, most of the time demographics fit into this because your gender is always going to precede the dependent variable. So if you're looking at gender and income, well, gender will be what precedes your income. Whether or not there's, an important relationship there, we don't know, but gender will always, come before your income. Your dependent variable is the one that changes when exposed to the independent variable. So we have a little example here on, again, this isn't social research, but it's a good example here. Your independent variable is what is manipulated or changed. So say we have, little potted plants and we're changing the amount of water that we're giving them and then looking at how that affects the plants. So your dependent variable is going to be your variable affected by the change. So the size, are plants that get more water, are they bigger? Do they have a greater number of leaves? If you give one plant water and withhold water from another, does one of the plants die? So again, this is the independent variable is the amount of water that we're giving the plants, and then the outcomes are the size, the number of leaves, and whether they are living or dead. Okay, so I just want to touch a little bit on the purposes of social research. So why do we do what we do? First type of research is exploratory. This is on topics that we don't know much about. It's usually done as a foundation for more in-depth studies and hypothesis testing. So if there's a topic that is rather novel, we might do a little exploratory research. Usually we're using qualitative research, so we're really diving very deeply into something to understand it a little bit better. And an example from my own research is what were the extent of behavioral problems in schools since coming back from COVID lockdowns. And again, these COVID lockdowns were really a novel thing at the time. I did this research, back in 2021. And I really wanted to know how, the COVID lockdowns affected this. So I did some in-depth interviews with school administrators to figure out, why that is. So a lot of times this is sort of the basic for a more extensive research project. So the next type of research is descriptive research. So this is quantitative in nature, and we're describing a phenomenon. So a really good example is crime rates. So we're counting how many crimes take place. Maybe we're looking at whether there's more crime this year than there was the year before. The little graphs on the side here from the Lubbock Police Department looking at crime rates. But one thing that we're not looking at is why these crimes are taking place. So it's simply counting something and showing the extent of something in the population. So again, birth rate, we're counting how many births people have per year. We're not, looking at why people are having more or less births, just like we're not looking at why crime's taking place, but we're simply describing it in a population. So the next type is explanatory research. So this is a lot of research that social researchers are doing, is to figure out the why. So this is sort of the most in-depth of the research. We're looking at causal relationships, see if there's relationships among variables. We're using theory, we're testing hypotheses. This could be either qualitative or quantitative or mixed methods. So we're looking at why people commit murders. So maybe we're, going into prisons and going onto death row and interviewing people and asking them why they murdered people. Or maybe we're taking a very large data set and doing some statistical analyses to see if, maybe something like substance abuse has any sort of relationship with murder. Okay, so two different dialects of social research, an idiographic and a nomothetic explanation. So an idiographic explanation is a very sort of deep look into one particular event. So an approach to explanation in which we seek to exhaust every single cause of a particular event. So for example, why was I late to work today? So maybe you say, okay, I slept in, my dog wouldn't, go to the bathroom outside, maybe I was out of gas and I had to stop at the gas station, and then there was traffic, and then Starbucks took forever. So this is breaking down one particular event and looking at sort of exhausting the reasons for why it happened. There's also the nomothetic explanation. So this is where we seek to identify a few causal factors that generally impacts an event. So if we wanted to say, generally, why are people late to work? We could say that this all boils down to time management. So we're not looking at every single time someone was late to work, but we're saying in general, the reason people are late to work is through time management. So overwhelmingly, we use nomothetic explanations in social research. Again, idiographic, this is used sometimes if we're looking at a case study or a very, very in-depth look into a particular event. But for the vast majority of social research, we're looking at nomothetic explanations for something. Okay, so two things to really think about again for when you are thinking about your project is inductive and deductive theory. So how does theory fit into your research question or your research project? So first is the inductive method. This is where you are going into your research project without, a really concrete idea of what you're going to find. So you're not starting out with a theory, you're basically making your observations, and when you are, looking at your data, you're generalizing from these observations and then, building a theory out of that. This is done a lot in qualitative research, not so much in quantitative research, it's more of a qualitative thing. So again, you're starting out with collecting your data and sort of looking for patterns when you're analyzing your data and then reaching your theory after that. Deductive theory, this is used a lot in quantitative research. Again, it doesn't necessarily have to be quantitative research, but this is when you kind of start out with a theory of what you're going to find, or a hypothesis. We use this when we are hypothesis testing. So for example, you want to start out with a prediction of what you're going to find. So maybe you say that kids who are less supervised by their parents are going to have higher delinquency rates, which, is something that we find all the time in criminological research. So we're starting out with our theory here of, unsupervised kids leading to delinquency. And then you look at your research. So maybe you collect your own data or use a data set that's already available. You make your observation and then say, yes, this fits the theory, or no, this does not fit the theory, and we're gonna accept or reject our hypothesis. This we're gonna go over at length in another chapter as well. Finally, one thing that we have to talk about here when we're talking about social research is determinism versus agency. So like I was saying before, we can never properly predict human behavior. Social science research is something that is never going to be perfectly predicted. There's always, exceptions to the rule. There's always somebody that just doesn't fit that pattern. And we have to remember that each of us possesses choice or agency, and we're able to for some part anyways, make our own decisions. We also allow ourselves to be, controlled by environmental forces, but we also have agency and the ability to sort of change the path that we're on. So humans, we rarely explain our actions on choice, and we have a tolerance for ambiguity or conflicting ideas in our minds simultaneously without denying or dismissing any of them. So again, looking for aggregates, looking for patterns, but we have to remember that people have agency, and we can never perfectly predict social research.